Welcome to Break and Build. I am Muniba Mazari. Let me tell you all something today that's going to shake the dust off your understanding of world politics. Because when a man stands up in the middle of that global chaos where everyone else is playing polite, dodging truth like it's hot lava, and he chooses to speak it anyway, that's a whole different level of courage. That's a whole different kind of leadership. And I'm talking about one man, one name, Dr. Stunned-Jaishankar. See, when he walks into a room full of diplomats, he don't flinch. When he sits across from leaders of countries who think they still run the show, he don't blink. He just brings the truth cold, raw, and unapologetically Indian. Now, the world wasn't ready for what this man had to say. Oh, they weren't prepared. They expected India to play soft, to stay polite, to nod along like it always did in the past. But the moment Jaishankar started speaking, you could feel the atmosphere shift. You could see folks shifting in their chairs, translators fumbling, cameras zooming in because everyone suddenly realized this man wasn't about to deliver a rehearsed speech. Nah, he was about to flip the entire script. You got to understand, India used to be that quiet kid in class, the one with all the answers, but kept his hand down because he knew the teacher wasn't going to call on him anyway. And when he finally did speak up, folks would chuckle or ignore it. But now that kid grew up, that kid became the professor, and now he's schooling the whole class, front row to back bench. Because India ain't just speaking, it's roaring. Jaishankar, he's the microphone. When he said, Europe's problems are not the world's problems, you could hear a pin drop in the global halls of power. Oh, he didn't say it to be rude. He said it because for too long, one continent's crisis was treated like humanity's apocalypse, while the rest of us, Africa, Asia, Latin America, we were living through hell and nobody batted an eye. Nobody held emergency summits for Afghanistan's starvation. Nobody sent billions to fix Haiti, but one border dispute in Europe. Suddenly the world stopped spinning. And Jaishankar said, now we're not doing that anymore. See, people like comfort. They like predictability. They want countries like India to remain civil, which is code for stay silent. But silence is expensive. It costs lives. It costs dignity, and India ain't paying that bill no more. When Jaishankar stands in those rooms, whether it's at the United Nations, in Washington, Brussels, or Beijing, he doesn't walk in looking for validation. He walks in representing 4 billion people. He walks in carrying centuries of history, of resistance, of survival. And he walks in with receipts. The world's been stunned because India is finally speaking with the voice it always had, but was never allowed to use colonialism. Jaishankar called it what it was: exploitation. Not some civilizing mission and not some misunderstood economic project. He laid it down plain. Y'all came. Y'all looted. And now y'all want to teach us about morality. Come on now, that ain't flying in 2025. This is a different India. This is an India that builds satellites and feeds the world. This is an India that holds its own in global trade and technology. You can't guilt-trip this India. You can't lecture this India because this India remembers everything and forgives little. See the truth he speaks. It ain't comfortable. It ain't dipped in sugar or wrapped in shiny paper. It's bold, it's bare, and it exposes all the double standards the global powers try so hard to hide. They'll tell India not to buy oil from Russia while quietly increasing their own imports. They'll say, oh, human rights matter, while selling weapons to the worst regimes on the planet, and Jaishankar, cool as ice, sits back and says, we see you. We just ain't playing along. People ask, why is the world so rattled? Because the man's not reading from the same tired script. He rewrote the whole playbook while others are out there giving diplomatic lectures. Jaishankar is giving reality checks. He's that professor who doesn't care if you like the grade. He cares that you earned it. And he's grading the world right now, red pen in hand. And the results don't look good. Let's talk about the global order. For decades, there's been this quiet agreement, unspoken but powerful, that the West will lead and the rest will follow. But that order only works when everyone pretends they're not being stepped on. Jaishankar walked in and said, we're not pretending anymore. And suddenly everyone's nervous because if India stops playing the game doesn't work. If 4 billion people stop bowing, the balance tilts, and it's tilting fast. You got leaders around the world scratching their heads. Why won't India condemn Russia? Why won't India follow our sanctions? Why is India trading with Africa on its own terms? And the answer is simple. Because it can. Because India is done asking for permission. You see, they love it when you're dependent, when you're begging for loans or approval. But what happens when you become self-reliant? when your economy booms, your military strengthens, your culture spreads across the globe, then suddenly you're not a partner, you're a problem. That's what's happening right now. And that's exactly why Jaishankar is so dangerous to the status quo. He ain't threatening anyone. He's just telling the truth. And the truth, when you've built your power on illusion, is the most dangerous weapon of all. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't pound the table. He just delivers his lines with surgical precision. And when he does, those words cut deep. Now, let's not get it twisted. This ain't about being anti-West or anti-anyone. It's about being pro-India. It's about being pro-sovereignty, pro-dignity, pro-equality. And when he says India will do what's in India's interest, he means it. He ain't waiting for a green light from Washington, Brussels, or Beijing. That train has left the station. And when other nations try to guilt-trip India, he reminds them of their own history. How they handled their own wars, their own oil deals, their own economic crisis. Jaishankar is a diplomat, yes, but don't confuse diplomacy with docility. This man plays chess, not checkers. Every word he says is calculated, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. He knows where India was, where it is, and exactly where it's going. And he's making sure the world knows too. And the young people of India, they see it, they feel it. They finally have a voice on the global stage that doesn't apologize, doesn't flinch, and doesn't play the victim. That's powerful. That's inspiring. That's transformational. Because when the youth sees a leader who speaks with fire but walks with grace, it changes how they see themselves. They no longer look at the world with inferiority. They look at it with intensity. See, the world always knew India had potential, but they didn't expect India to realize it so soon. They thought it would take another 50 years. They thought poverty and politics would hold it back. But here we are, standing tall, calling out hypocrisy, speaking on equal terms, and the voice leading that movement. That's Jaishankar. Calm, confident, unbothered. When he talks about the Indo-Pacific, he ain't talking about spheres of influence. He's talking about freedom of navigation. When he addresses BRICS, he ain't looking to follow China. He's looking to balance it. When he speaks to the US, he does it with mutual respect, not subservience. He knows the game and he plays it better than most. And the world, they're still trying to figure out how this quiet man from India became the loudest voice in the room. They call it unexpected. They call it provocative. But let me tell you something. It's overdue, because the world has heard enough from the same voices for too long. It's time they listen to a country that understands resilience, that's been invaded, colonized, partitioned, and still stood tall. That's invented zero, launched rockets, healed pandemics, and educated the globe. That's carried the weight of history on its back, and is now ready to lead the future. And all of this, it's not by accident. It's by intention, by design, by courage. Because when Jaishankar gets up to speak, he ain't performing. He's testifying. He's giving the kind of truth that makes people uncomfortable, because it makes them confront the lies they've lived with. And the world, they can be stunned all they want. They can write editorials, host panels, try to dissect every word he says. But the truth is they're not just stunned, they're scared. Scared because India's rise isn't quiet anymore. It's loud, it's proud, and it's permanent. And leaders like Jaishankar, they're the reason why. Because while the world was busy building narratives, India was building a nation. While others talked about equality, India demanded it. While some tried to keep India at the kids' table, Jaishankar pulled up a chair at the head and brought a whole new menu. So let the world watch. Let them be stunned. Let them try to figure out how the script changed so fast. But those of us paying attention, we know it changed the moment India stopped apologizing for its strength and started owning it. The moment truth stopped being whispered in corners and started echoing through global halls. The moment Jaishankar spoke, not just as a diplomat, but as a mirror showing the world what it really looks like and asking now what you're going to do about it. By breaking silence, Jaishankar didn't isolate India. He inspired the global south to speak up. And that right there, that was the moment the global conversation shifted. For years, decades even, the global south sat in the shadows while the elite FF from the global north passed the mic back and forth, telling the world how to think, how to trade, how to behave, and how to survive. They wrote the rules, broke the same rules, and still demanded obedience. And for the longest time, the global south complied, not because it lacked voice, but because it lacked a leader who would dare speak when silence had become the price of survival. Then came Jaishankar, a man not swayed by applause, a man who didn't come to flatter anyone or bow before power. He came with a memory that stretches beyond colonial narratives and into the lived truth of billions. And the moment he stood before global powers and said no more, it sent shockwaves. But those shockwaves weren't just felt in Europe or in Washington or in Geneva. No, the tremors were felt in Nairobi, in Jakarta, in Caracas, in Dhaka, in Johannesburg, in La Paz. Because suddenly someone from the global south was not just speaking, he was being heard, and the world couldn't ignore him. This wasn't just about India asserting its power. This was about a man putting the dignity of an entire hemisphere back on the global stage. For too long, nations across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and parts of the Middle East have been told they're developing. As if development is something given, not something earned. As if sovereignty is negotiable. As if independence needs to be validated by the G7 or NATO. But when Jaishankar spoke, he didn't ask for validation. He gave representation, and that changed everything. He went to forums that were once echo chambers for Western consensus and flipped the script. When he said we will do what's in our interest, it was more than policy. It was permission. Permission for every small and medium power to stop apologizing for defending their people. It was a coded message that said, you don't need to ask, you just need to act. And the leaders of the global south heard him loud and clear. They heard him when he said India wouldn't be bullied into abandoning its relationships based on someone else's agenda. They heard him when he called out selective outrage, pointing out how wars in Europe get media saturation and emergency summits, but humanitarian disasters in Yemen, Sudan, and Myanmar barely get a headline. They heard him when he asked why nations with a colonial past still think they can dictate who India trades with or how it votes. But most importantly, they heard him when he stopped playing nice with global powers that confuse influence with intimidation. And make no mistake, this wasn't some overnight transformation. This was decades of frustration, of patronizing foreign aid, of economic arm twisting, finally finding a voice. And that voice didn't shake. That voice didn't tremble. That voice said what so many nations were thinking, but didn't have the geopolitical cover to say. But now that cover has arrived, and it's wearing a narrow jacket with conviction stitched into every seam. See, the global south didn't suddenly become aware of its exploitation. It always known, but it lacked a rallying point. It lacked someone to stand tall without bending to pressure. Someone with the economic clout, cultural pride, and diplomatic finesse to call out hypocrisy and still command respect. Jaishankar became that symbol not because he sought it, but because he earned it. Look around today. African nations are pushing back against old colonial narratives. Latin America is exploring new alliances outside of the US sphere. Southeast Asia is refusing to become a pawn in the US-China chessboard. These shifts aren't accidental. They're echoes of a diplomatic rhythm. And India's beat leads that drum line. Every time Jaishankar addresses a press conference or panel and speaks about fairness in global governance, he's not doing it for applause. He's doing it because the institutions built after World War II never represented the modern world. How can the United Nations Security Council be legitimate when Africa has no permanent seat? How can the IMF preach financial discipline when it's never been accountable for the collapse it helped cause in countless nations? And how can countries that caused the climate crisis dictate the green future to countries still trying to electrify their villages? He brings this hypocrisy out not with anger but with clarity, and that's what frightens the status quo. Because clarity kills confusion, clarity kills manipulation, and clarity inspires courage. Courage for a leader in Ghana to say we will no longer be dictated to. Courage for a finance minister in Peru to say we will explore trade with Asia. Courage for Indonesia to say we will not choose sides, we will define our own. And that's what's happening now. The global south is no longer waiting for a seat at the table. They're building their own and the blueprint. It looks a whole lot like India's model. A model that respects tradition but embraces innovation, that builds billion-dollar tech sectors while protecting cultural identity, that negotiates with everyone but bows to no one. And if anyone doubts the impact of Jaishankar's words, just look at how the media responds. They call him blunt, unorthodox, even defiant. But the truth is they call him those things because he doesn't say what they want to hear. He says what needs to be heard. When he defends India's oil purchases from Russia, he doesn't offer excuses. He offers logic. Europe buys more oil in a day than we do in a quarter. That line didn't just defend India. It exposed the selective moral outrage the global South has been subjected to for years. So now, when other nations sit in those same rooms and consider their alliances, their trade deals, their policies, they don't just ask, what would Washington say? They ask, what did Jaishankar do? That shift is monumental. That shift means the global South has options. And having options means having power. And when power grows in unexpected places, the old centers of influence start to shake. That's what's happening now. You're seeing countries diversify their energy partners, their defense strategies, their diplomatic friendships, not out of rebellion but out of realism, out of the realization that their future shouldn't be held hostage by someone else's foreign policy, that their growth shouldn't be dependent on aid with strings attached, that their people deserve choices and their governments deserve respect. Shankar's biggest achievement isn't a speech, it isn't a summit win. It's that he's redefined what strong diplomacy looks like for countries that have long been talked over. He's shown that a nation can speak boldly without burning bridges, can act in its own interest without becoming isolated, can challenge the global order without descending into chaos. And now you've got leaders across continents studying that playbook, because for too long they've been forced into roles subservient, quiet, agreeable. But the new role, the one Jaishankar carved out with precision and patience, that role is one of sovereignty, a voice of pride, and the global South has picked up the script. What you're seeing now is the emergence of a new tone, one where African nations talk about technology, not charity, where Latin American leaders speak of resilience, not dependence, where Southeast Asia refuses to be drawn into proxy wars. All of this inspired in part by a man who decided that truth was more important than tradition. That respect isn't demanded, it's demonstrated. And as he keeps walking into rooms and calling out what no one else will, he's not just speaking for India. He's showing what it looks like when a post-colonial power finds its full voice. And in that moment, he becomes a mirror for all those nations who were told they were too small to matter, too poor to lead, or too unstable to trust. He becomes proof that history isn't destiny, that silence isn't diplomacy, that dignity isn't optional. This is why when he talks, they listen, even if they don't like what he says. This is why when he walks in, they adjust their notes because the world is learning something that the global South has always known deep down. The ones who speak last often speak loudest. And now the voice of the global South is no longer a whisper. It's a wave, and Jaishankar, he didn't cause that wave. He just showed the world how to ride. And so, what we're witnessing isn't just a diplomatic shift. It's a reawakening. Jaishankar didn't arrive to entertain the global elite. He arrived to educate them. He didn't raise India's voice just to be heard. He raised it to be understood, to be respected, and to remind the world that dignity is not negotiable. In his quiet fire lies the thunder of 1 billion hopes, the weight of centuries of struggle, and the resolve of a nation that will no longer walk behind anyone. India, through him, has shattered the old mirrors of Western validation and built its own. It's no longer waiting to be included in conversations. It's leading them, reshaping them, and challenging every outdated script along the way. The global South has found not just a voice, but a compass. One that doesn't tremble in the face of pressure, one that doesn't seek approval, one that walks in truth even when truth is uncomfortable. Shankar didn't just redefine diplomacy, he redefined what leadership looks like in a post-colonial world. The world will remember this era not for how it resisted change, but for how India demanded it. And now, with every word he speaks, history listens and the future takes note.